All right, I'm just going to jump right in here today as we talk about wisdom. And wisdom in Proverbs in general says much about ethics. And we've created really a subcategory of doing right, and we call it ethics. And various situations, we have various kinds of ethics. And what Proverbs tells us is very obvious, I think, but wisdom is ethical. And so one author said ethics is knowing the difference between what you have a right to do and what is right to do. So now we're separating out what is legal and maybe even permissible in various situations and is not actually the right thing to do. And so you know, credit card companies can charge a huge amount of interest on their credit cards and can figure out various ways to help you increase that interest. And so they give you a minimum monthly payment that actually doesn't pay down your debt at all. So you continue recycling your debt and increasing your interest. It's all legal, right, and permitted, but certainly not in the sense of the Old Testament. Is it a good, proper thing to do? It's not actually beneficial to anybody. C.S. Lewis said, integrity is doing the right thing even when no one is watching. And that's what we're really talking about in ethics is integrity, doing what is right. Doing what is right when you can get away with doing what is wrong. And so there's a few categories that we're going to talk about of ethics as we go through here. And the first one is just simply business ethics. And so if you have your Bibles, open them to Proverbs 11:1. It says, dishonest scales are an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. So what's the scales all about? What's he talking about? Yeah. So you have the old balance scales, like what she's holding up on the screen. The old balance scales. And there are various ways of jimmying those scales for your own benefit. But one of the easiest ones was to have two separate systems of weights. So if you're selling something, you have a lighter weight, and so that you're selling less grain per dollar. If you're buying something, you have a heavier weight. And so, or you might have the standard weight, the legal weight, so that if somebody questions it, you can pull that one out and say, no, I have this is right. And what he says here is dishonest scales are an abomination to the Lord. But a just weight, a right and proper weighing, is his delight. Part of what this verse tells us is God cares how businesses treat their customers. That's a significant statement. That when you're talking about daily living, going to the grocery store, going to a restaurant, going to the gas station, shopping online, God cares how Amazon treats its customers. God cares how Jack's treats its customers. I mean, that should radically change the way we think about business and think about the companies and the people that we do business with. And part of what this verse tells us is that dishonest business practices disgust God. This word abomination, it's not just something that is unclean, but that there is a certain offensiveness about it. It is disgusting to God. It is a stench. It is something that is nauseating. It is that which you don't want to be around. And so it's not just God cares how businesses treat their customers, but we take it a step farther, and when businesses are dishonest, when they are cheating customers, that is an abominable, disgusting thing to God. And so Proverbs 23 verse 10, it says, "Do not remove the ancient landmark, nor enter the fields of the fatherless. For their Redeemer is mighty. He will plead their cause against you." Anybody know what the ancient landmark is? We actually still have things like this all around. We have section markers. So you see out in the streets, various streets, some property corners, there will be a section marker, a permanent fixture that the state or the county has put in to indicate this is the fixed corner of this section, and that is one of the fixed points from which surveyors will begin now to survey out a property. I know nowadays they're using a lot more satellite things, so they're not having quite as many of the fixed reference points, but I think it's still true. And we have property lines, and many property lines. I know out here at the church there are 4 very clearly marked corner posts on the church property. Actually, there's more than that. I think there's 6 of them. They're big stakes driven into the ground that mark the boundary lines of the property. And that's what the ancient landmark was. It was a fixed point. It would have been probably a stone monument of some sort, but it's a fixed point that marked out the corners of property. And what would be the point of moving that? If I walk over and start pulling up these stakes here on the west side of the church property, and I move them over 6 inches a month, and start claiming my neighbor's property. And he says, "Do not do this, nor enter the fields." The parallelism is it's a kind of a developing parallelism. He's saying the same thing, but he's building on it. Don't move the ancient landmark, but nor enter the fields of the fatherless. So I'm now stepping into his field, taking his field. What's the condition of the fatherless? Well, why is that an important term, an important descriptor, the fatherless? Yeah, they have nobody to defend them. They're the orphans. The fatherless are relatively powerless in that culture. So so they're an easy target because they don't have the money to sue. They don't have the station in the society for people to listen to them. They're an easy target. But what Solomon says is their Redeemer is mighty, and he will plead their cause against you. He will be the one who judges, and he's the one that will file suit against you. And so you do not cheat the powerless. That really is a broad principle. And just because you can get away with it doesn't mean you should. You don't cheat those that aren't going to know any better. And Malcolm Forbes said you can easily judge the character of a man by how he treats those who can do nothing for him. I think that's a great statement. How do you treat those who have nothing to offer? How do you treat those who, again, you can get away with mistreating, taking advantage of? And so when it comes to business practices, wisdom in our business practices, provide what you promise. I mean, that's really simple, and I don't think this is anything new to any of us. But if you say you're going to do something, if you're saying you're going to make something, you're saying you're selling something, provide it. Yeah, you may have seen, I know every once in a while I'll come across online people who are saying, I ordered a brand new iPhone from Amazon or eBay or somewhere, and I got a box of rocks. And they get a nice iPhone case with rocks in it. And obviously that's not Christian. That's not wisdom. That's not right. It's not ethical. We certainly don't go to those extremes and cheat people. But we also, when it comes to even maybe the smaller areas, we can get away with it. And so that we give. If you say you're going to do it, you do it. If you say this is the product I'm selling, that's what you're selling. And if you can't, if something comes up and you can't provide what you said you would, then you're forthright in saying, this is, I intended to, I can't. I'm not going to charge you for it. We're going to make this fair and right, but the endeavor is just simply to give. If you say you're going to do this or provide this, that's what you provide, nothing less. And then you also charge a fair price. And this is, we live in a free market and capitalistic market where fair price is somewhat driven by the demands of the market. So we do recognize that things don't actually come with price tags on them. An apple does not have an inherent value that it's worth 50 cents just because that's what an apple's worth. It's worth, really what it's worth is somewhat related to what people pay for it or willing to pay for it. And then it's also worth what is the labor involved to get this apple. And so that there's a fair price is that which is providing a reasonable wage for the person providing the product. It's not a fair price to charge less so that an employer is not paying his employees. So I can't afford to because I had to lower my prices. And it's not a fair price to say, well, I can now charge 5 times as much as it cost me to get this. I'm just throwing out a number there, but I'm charging this huge amount more than what it actually cost because I can. And there's a balancing point. And I'm not going to get into economics. We can talk about supply and demand, and a product is in high demand and it is that good. It may be fair to raise the price because the supply is limited. But ultimately, the goal is what is fair, what is proper, right, reasonable to provide this to the individual and to provide a living wage to the person who's produced it and a livable purchase price for the person that needs it. Be honest in all that you do. I mean, I don't think that even needs explanation. Just simply be honest. And do not cut corners. It used to be that one of the ways that people would cheat with their money is they would literally trim pieces off the edges of coins. And you do that enough, you handle enough coins and you do that enough, you're going to get a nice little pile of shavings that now is really worth something. And don't cut corners. Don't trim off what you can get away with. If you said you're going to do this, do it. And do it to the best of your ability. I don't know who said this, but he said integrity is not just a principle. It is a practice that affects every decision. Talk about lending. There's a biblical word called usury. Usury is not the same as interest. So interest is just simply the rate charged when on a debt. You have an interest on your mortgage. You're getting interest if you have a savings account or you have CDs. You're getting interest on what you have in those accounts. It is a percentage that returns the investor or the lender gives the lender some return on the use of their money, or in the saver it gives them a return on the saving, and so that it's not interest. There's nothing necessarily unbiblical about charging a reasonable interest. Usury is interest upon interest, which makes it nearly impossible to pay off the original loan. And so I do know that there are some credit card companies that I would say are usurious in their interest rates. They have 25% interest rates, and they have so many additional fees on everything, so that if you are behind at all on a payment, you seemingly can never get caught up. I think of almost a loan shark kind of ideas. So you get $100 and it's 10% a day. that you don't pay it back. So you go a week and you owe $70 on the $100 loan. Most people that need to borrow $100 from a loan shark can't afford that kind of interest rate. That's the kind of thing that it's talking about, is something that is just, it is so overwhelming in its burdensomeness that it's almost impossible to get out from under it. It really would take an incredible act of finding a bunch of money, winning a bunch of money, somebody giving you a large gift, inheriting something suddenly. It would take that kind of windfall almost to pay it off. And that is what is forbidden in the Mosaic Law. It is that usury that is burdensome. And so Proverbs 28 verse 8, go ahead and turn there. And this is a good point for me to pause and to point out that a lot of what's going on in Proverbs, and we see it especially in this section here as we think about ethics, but a lot of what's happening in Proverbs is a direct application of the law of Moses. It's very specific applications of the law of Moses. So in the case of usury, it's very obvious because the law of Moses forbids it. And Solomon is restating it, is giving some other ways of thinking about it, some other principles related to it. We would say with all of these ethical things, as we're dealing with other people, all of these are fleshing out of the Old Testament law's commands to love one another. Leviticus 19:10, love one another. That's what Solomon is fleshing out in these Proverbs. It's not just the really specific and the really general. Really, we can see a lot of the Old Testament at work underneath a lot of the Old Testament law at work underneath many of the Proverbs. So as you're reading and studying, if you've been reading through the Bible, through the Bible through in a year program with the church, you've recently finished up Deuteronomy. And there's a lot in Deuteronomy that ties in very closely to Proverbs. And so as you're reading Proverbs and remembering some of what you read in Deuteronomy, or maybe going back and rereading what you read in Deuteronomy in light of Proverbs, there's a lot of overlap there that I think reveals both Proverbs and Deuteronomy, makes them more clear to us and more helpful to us. But Proverbs 28 verse 8 says, one who increases his possessions by usury and extortion gathers it for him who will pity the poor. It's interesting that Solomon puts usury and extortion together here. But he says, really what he's saying here is those who are rich, made rich by usury, are going to lose it. Some of what we do is we're thinking about just usury in general. Lending practices should consider the well-being of others, not just what makes the most money. Sometimes you might hear somebody talking about, we have a duty to our shareholders. And yeah, there's an obligation, and that's part of why people invest in the business, is to make money off of it. And there's not wrong to consider the profit. But we must not consider the profit without also considering the well-being of others. And so, honestly, if our credit card companies had any notion of this, they would be a lot more stringent in who they were giving credit cards to. If our banking institutions were really practicing this, they would be much more stringent on who they're giving loans to. They're not quite so aggressive in promoting loans. But recognizing that there is an enslavement in debt, and that sometimes it is a crushing burden. It should not be placed on somebody, but instead they look at, how can I make more money? If I give them this piece of plastic and they run up $10,000 worth of debt on it, now you're getting 20% interest on that every month. That's a lot of money coming in from somebody who couldn't afford it in the first place. Wisdom and the ethics of wisdom teaches us to consider the well-being of others. And this has some real pertinent application to us as individuals. We're not a lending institution. I don't think anybody here is a lending institution. But we do, at times, people ask to borrow money. And we may not charge interest, But this value, it's worthwhile to stop and consider, is it beneficial even to lend at this point? This person is asking, should I be lending or should I be doing something else? Is there something that is more beneficial to them than loaning them the money and having them continuing on in whatever cycle they may be in? And so we should be considering the well-being of others in our lending. Do not take advantage of the needs of others. Proverbs 14:21 says, "He who despises his neighbor sins, but he who has mercy on the poor, happy is he." That word mercy there is showing pity, having favor and kindness on those who are in need. And the contrasting parallelism here is the one who despises his neighbor is contrasted with the one who has mercy on the poor. We can infer from that the refusal to have mercy is despising your neighbor. And so we see others in need. Instead of looking and saying, well, how can I make the most out of this? It is, how can I minister to them? Do not support those who oppress the needy. And I think Proverbs teaches, and I think biblical wisdom teaches us that if we know, for example, there's a shop in China that is employing, child slave labor, and we shouldn't be buying T-shirts from them. And I know, we run into troubles there because we can't really find out the business practices of every business that we do business with. But when it's known that there is a true oppression going on, we shouldn't support them. And I would take this. I'm going to keep picking on credit cards. They're easy targets here. But if we know, credit card companies are charging these usurious interest rates, and there are certain ones and certain programs that seem to be particularly severe. It shouldn't be. If you're going to have a credit card, go with a different company. Don't go into that one that is just weighing people down with this huge burden of debt. So do what you can. Do not support those who oppress the needy. I don't think we need to go so far as, what do they call it now, fair trade goods? Is that the right term? Yeah. The fair trade stuff where the company or whatever promises you that this has been ethically resourced from wherever in the world. It's certainly probably nothing wrong with it, but I don't know that we need to make sure everything we buy is fair trade type product, but we should be careful and should be aware to the best of our ability that we're not supporting oppression. And ultimately, generosity is better than profit. That's what Proverbs 28:8 points us to. You can get rich by usury, but the one who is better off, the one who's going to, in the end, gain, is the one who is merciful. Generosity is better than profit. Michael Josephson, I think this is a great statement. He says there's no such thing as business ethics. There's just ethics. There's not a subcategory of business ethics that are somehow different from the rest of the ethical realm. There's not legal ethics and medical ethics. We can't divide ethics into these subcategories and treat them as if they are all different. Ethics is ethics. If it is right and proper, it is right and proper. Ethics makes no concession for the real or imagined necessities of making a profit. It's a strong statement. I think it's a great statement. I think we should be plastering that one up in Wall Street. Ethics makes no concessions for the real or imagined necessities of making a profit. So I think that is helpful for us in just thinking through how we do business in our own lives, who we do business with. And also recognizing, going through that, we're really not, I know, Ann, you do some online or some business stuff on the side, but I don't think anybody else does anything like that. Maybe they do, but we're not really, I don't think any of us are large banking institutions, lending institutions, large businesses. But it does affect, how we do business on whatever scale we do business. So we do make promises to people. We do help one another. We do say, hey, yeah, I'll come over. I'll help you split the wood or whatever it may be. All of that applies to those individual circumstances in our lives. And so there's some real, if you think through these broader principles, there really is some deep application to our own individual lives. Having said that, the next batch of ethics or section of ethics, even though we shouldn't divide ethics, the next section of ethics, I think it may be much more immediately pertinent to us or obviously pertinent to us. It's just relational ethics. The first one is lying. Lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but those who deal truthfully are his delight. I had years ago, somebody asked me, does the Bible ever forbid us from lying? I'm like, well, yeah, the Ten Commandments. Thou shalt not bear false witness. And they rightly said, well, no, that's dealing with testimony. We're actually going to talk about that in a minute. That's dealing with legal testimony. Does it actually forbid all lying all the time in any situation? And at that time, I don't think I had the greatest answer for that. I still was like, yes, it does forbid lying. There's no question about that. Certainly, I did not have a convincing answer for that person at that point in time. But Proverbs 12:22, I think it should be an incredibly persuasive answer that the Bible absolutely forbids lying. There's other places as well. Lying lips are an abomination to the Lord. Lying disgusts God. It's just that simple. God does not like lying. And even in those situations where we have to weigh the choices between telling the truth and some tragic result from that, we still have to tell the truth. Because lying still disgusts God. There's no, and in the Proverbs and anywhere else in Scriptures, I don't see anywhere where God says it's okay to lie in these kinds of situations. If there's going to be somebody killed, if there's going to be this kind of tragedy or this kind of result, then it's okay to lie a little. I don't see that anywhere in Scriptures. And I know I'm probably opening a lot of issues there that I'm not going to deal with today for time's sake. But it's just simply, we have to be honest because God hates lying. And honesty delights the Lord. And those who are honest delight the Lord. It's what it says there in the second half of this contrasting parallelism is those who deal truthfully are his delight. The honest people delight God. So tell the truth. I mean, really, it's just that simple. Tell the truth. Now we come into a challenging verse. Proverbs 25, verses 21 and 22. If your enemy is hungry, give him bread to eat. And if he is thirsty, give him water to drink. For so you will heap coals of fire on his head, and the Lord will reward you. So you have two verses here, definitely together. So this is one proverb, even though it's 4 lines instead of 2 lines like many of them are. But the first verse, what kind of parallelism? If your enemy is hungry, give him bread to eat. If he is thirsty, give him water to drink. Yeah, this is a developing, it's certainly repeating the same basic idea, but it's not just stating the same basic idea. It's giving 2 interrelated ideas together to fill out the picture. So that one's first 2 lines are absolutely a developing proverb. What about the second 2 lines? Yeah, I would say this is developing. It is stating a purpose. For is so that, because. It's stating, and I think there is a purpose in this. It's not just a straight cause and effect. If you do this, then this will happen. But it is feed, give water, because, and these two things are related together. You'll heap coals of fire on his head, and the Lord will reward you. So there's a development of the idea within that verse. You will do this first, and then the Lord will do this. And so I would say in all four lines, you have a developing proverb still. And because I say it's a developing proverb instead of a cause and effect, because as I've already said, the word for there suggests it's not just the result that will happen, but it is a purpose, a desire, an aim in the first half, so that the second is what you're aiming for. And so it's more purposeful rather than just cause and effect. So the first line there, we now have our enemy. So the focus of the first line is the enemy. Give me a definition, explanation of what's an enemy. Okay, somebody that's working against you, somebody who is not seeking your well-being, does not like you, maybe is seeking to do harm to you, maybe is talking bad about you. In some way, they have set themselves in opposition to you. So your neighbor that is always blowing his snow into your driveway. What's the condition the enemy is in the first line? He is hungry. So if your enemy is hungry, what are you supposed to do? You give bread. Give him bread to eat. So this is the exact opposite of human nature. It's not, relish his hunger, but instead it's minister to him. So the second line there, who is the he? The enemy. So if this one who is against you what's his condition here? If he is thirsty, the next two words are identical to the two words in the first line. Give him water. Give him that which will minister to him, which will satisfy his need. And just as an aside, I don't think the fact that he says bread and water means that Solomon's intending you just giving the basics, the bare essentials, and nothing more. These were the staples. These were everybody ate bread and drank water. So he's not saying really anything, except for give him bread and water. Give him what he needs to eat and drink. And then the second half of these four lines, there's three different people. There's two different people acting in this second half of this proverb here. Who are the two actors? Yeah, you. I'll pause there on you. When you give your enemy bread and water, when you feed him and give him to drink, you will do something. What will you do? You'll heap coals of fire on his head. And this is an incredibly complicated phrase that I have not found what I think is a solid, very certain answer of what exactly he's talking about. So honestly, I can't explain right now the heaping coals of fire, where that's coming from, what it's exactly intended to mean. There's a few suggestions out there I don't want to take the time to delve into. I will say, though, in the context of these four lines, you're doing good. Should your doing good be done for an evil purpose? No. Absolutely not. And there are some who say that by doing this, you're going to make him more miserable, or that you're going to crush him with your kindness, essentially. And there's sometimes it's communicated as it's going to have this negative effect that you're going to get even with him by doing good. And that cannot be the case. It does not fit anything in what this proverb says. And so, Paul in Romans chapter 12 quotes these two verses and applies it in exactly the same way. And again, it's not, there's no negative, there's no sense in that of do good so that he'll hurt, so you'll make him miserable. The sense in Proverbs and Romans is do good for their good. And so whatever these coals of fire are, they must be for the good of the individual. Whatever the specific good is, I don't know. I can't answer that. So the first actor is you. By doing good, you will bring further good. Who's the second actor in the second half of this proverb? The Lord. Now the Lord is going to do something. What's he going to do? Yeah, he will reward you for your kindness to your enemy. And so as we think through some of what this proverb teaches us, I'm just going to be very simple here as we think about revenge. And what this proverb teaches us about revenge is we do good to those who do you evil. Part of what this teaches us is first, revenge is foolish. We don't look to get even because revenge is folly. Kindness towards enemies is wise. Is that the way that our culture and our world at large usually thinks? Is kindness towards enemies wise? No, not at all. This is probably not going to see this line in The Art of War, for example, if you're reading anything like that. But this is biblical wisdom. This is true wisdom. And part of why this is wise, this is not the full answer, but part of why this is wise is you will never lose what you give in kindness. So what you give water and bread to an enemy, you will be rewarded. What you give in kindness to an enemy will never be lost. There will be a reward for it. So how do we apply this? We do not seek revenge. I mean, that's just really starts there, that simple. We do not seek revenge. Now let me stop there because we need to give a basic definition. What is revenge? Okay. Giving back in kind. What kind of kind? Yeah, exactly. Not kind. When somebody has done unkind things to me, I do unkind things back to them in kind. That's revenge. When I'm seeking to make them suffer, to punish them for their actions. Now, what's the difference between revenge and justice? Okay, revenge is seeking harm. What else? Yeah, I would say that's a good delineation right there. Revenge is self-centered. It's what is making me feel better. I'm getting even with him. Justice is there's a punishment required. And the Bible does not teach Christians to never seek justice. And in fact, we depend upon the state to be a terror to evildoers. And justice, though, it's not for me and just making me feel better, but that there are times when it is for the good of the individual, but it is for the good of the state, the good of society at large, that this evildoer is punished. And it's being done, and I think a big part of the justice is somewhat the impersonal nature, or maybe I should say the ideally objective nature of it. And when I go out and I try to get revenge, it's deeply personal. I have a huge interest in making that person suffer. Justice is a step back from that. And it's not saying, I just want to make you suffer, but we want to really require of a wrongdoer that which is right in payment for his wrong. And so it may be a fine. It may be making them repay something. It may be, in our society, it may be in prison time. It may be capital punishment, depending on the crime. But there's no point in that. Is the state looking and saying, we want you just to suffer as terrible as possible, and we'll all feel better about it? No, it's the state saying, no, there is a consequence. This, you have done this, you have committed a wrong. There's a consequence of that wrong, and we must administer a consequence of that wrong that is comparable in weight and value as the wrong committed. Which is why, if there's been theft, biblically, you repay and you give more besides. If there's been murder, then they execute capital punishment. You don't pay a fine for murder because human is worth far more than money. It cannot be repaid in kind. The only thing you can do is take the life of the one who committed murder. And so we do not seek the self-satisfaction, the selfishness of revenge. We seek good, not harm, for your enemy. We do not do good for evil reasons. And part of this is we are trusting God to both reward and revenge. Do not say, I will recompense evil. Wait for the Lord, and he will save you. So we see in Proverbs 25:22, the Lord will reward you for your goodness. Here, in Proverbs 20, verse 22, the Lord is the one who repays the evil. And we trust him. And ultimately, vengeance doesn't trust God. It assumes I have to do it myself. Proverbs 26:27. Whoever digs a pit will fall into it, and he who rolls a stone will have it roll back on him. So what kind of proverb is this? Yeah, it does have the figures of speech in it, but it's not an illustrating proverb. I would call this a developing proverb. Actually, we're having, just like feeding a hungry enemy and giving water to a thirsty enemy, we have the same kind of development. It's a fuller situation that's being depicted here. So, and honestly, it may help you as you read this verse. Think Wile E. Coyote. Why would you dig a pit? In the proverb, why do you think he would dig a pit? Somebody would dig a pit. Yeah, to trap someone. In this case, it's very much someone. This particular section of Proverbs 26, the surrounding verses are helpful. It's not always true of the Proverbs, but verse 24 says, he who hates disguises it with his lips and lays up deceit within himself. When he speaks kindly, do not believe him, for there are 7 abominations in his heart. Though his hatred is covered by deceit, his wickedness will be revealed before the assembly. Whoever digs a pit will fall into it, and he who rolls a stone will have it roll back on him. A lying tongue hates those who are crushed by it, and a flattering mouth works ruin. So in the context, it's those who hate people. And so the digging of the pit is because somebody hates somebody else. What about the rolling of the stone? What would you do that for? Yeah, to curse someone. You're setting it up in ambush so that whether they hit a tripwire and it rolls down on them, or you sit up there on the top of the cliff and try to push it off, and that's the idea. It's both of these are describing somebody who very intentionally does something, and in this case does a lot of work to seek harm to somebody else. So I'm going to kind of skip through this. Whoever digs a pit, what's going to happen to him? So if you seek to harm another, what's going to happen to you? The harm that, part of what Solomon is saying is a harm that you're trying to do to others is going to fall back on yourself. And this is why I think Wile E. Coyote here. You launch the boulder up in the air, and it's going to loop back around and squash you. You lay the trap. You paint the road on the side of the cliff, and the road runner is going to run right through it. And you try to run into it, you're going to splat against it. So, formative years of my life, obviously, were very profitable here. You will fall into the pit you dig, and he, same person, who rolls a stone, what's going to happen to him? Yeah, it's going to roll right back on him. So one of the principles we see of this is we think about malice, and malice is that seeking to harm. It's an anger, it's a vengefulness sometimes, but it ultimately is that wishing or desiring harm on others. In this particular case, it is acting to bring harm to others. And one of the principles we see, we've already covered, is harm to others harms self. This proverb also indicates something to us. Justice is a right expectation. We expect the good guys to win. We expect the ones who are seeking to harm others to come to harm themselves. We are seeking that criminals will be arrested. We expect these things, and they're right expectations. And that's what Solomon is saying here, is that this is the course of life. This is the way that things should be. And maybe not in the strictest literal sense, but that there will be a consequence to their wicked action. And so we are right to expect justice. And as we already saw in Proverbs 23, God will punish those who plot evil against others. I mean, there's really some scheming involved to move the landmark to get more property for yourself. But God is the one who will punish. And so how do we apply this principle? Do not plan harm to others. And then also recognize that your actions have consequences to yourself. Think about what you're doing. In those times of anger, think about what you're doing and the consequences to yourself. And then we have legal ethics. And this is, I'm not going to ask you to tell me what kind of parallelism this is, because it's a very challenging one. But a present is a precious stone in the eyes of its possessor. Wherever he turns, he prospers. This is simply a statement, a formal parallelism that is making an observation. So it's very strictly, it's an observational proverb. And that's important. There are some that are like this in the book of Proverbs, that in the proverb itself, it doesn't state whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. It just says, this is it. This is the way it is. This is one of those cases where Solomon just says, this is the way it is. And we have to deduce from the rest of what we know in Proverbs whether or not this is a good thing or a bad thing. So he's talking about a present. The word I would use is a bribe. That's what Solomon's talking about, is bribery. And so whether it be bribery in legal cases for justice, bribery to get a criminal off or to have somebody falsely convicted. It may be bribery in trying to have a decision go your way so that you pay off the zoning council to zone the property the way that you want it zoned, or you talk to somebody in the building department and you pay him off to condemn a building so that you can buy it up and tear it down and build your apartment building there. Any kind of bribe that is being used specifically to turn justice in your favor. favor. What is this bribe compared to? A precious stone. Give me an example of a precious stone. A diamond, ruby, emeralds, gemstones. Things that are incredibly valuable. So what he's saying is this bribe in your hand, the one who has the bribe and the ability to bribe, views this as a jewel. It to him. It's in the eyes of its possessor. So he's not talking about how everybody else sees it, but in the one who has the bribe, to him, it's incredibly profitable. It's incredibly valuable because wherever he turns, he prospers. Why is he prospering? Yeah, he's paying to get what he wants. He is paying to manipulate justice for his own ends. He's paying, ultimately, this violates the business ethics. He's not concerned about the well-being of others. He's not paying for, equality, but for an unfair advantage. So, even my description of it there, is Solomon in favor of bribery or against it? Well, the verse itself doesn't tell us. We have to bring into play what else we know about wisdom from the book of Proverbs. We have to say, again, because it violates some of what we've already talked about, it violates the basic command, love one another. Love your neighbor as yourself. Is the one giving a bribe so he can buy the property or snatch up property to build his huge office complex? Is he loving that neighbor that's living on that property and has nowhere else to go? No, not at all. Is he loving that business competitor who doesn't have the money for a bribe? No. And so in the context of Proverbs, we have to read this as this is a negative statement. This, it's accurate in the way the world works. Those kinds of things are not new to America. They're not new to humanity. They've been going on probably since we first had our very first bureaucrat. Whether it be in Nimrod's kingdom or in Cain's city of Nod, whatever the first bureaucrat popped up, there was somebody right behind him with a bribe. That's my cynical view of world history. And Solomon is saying this is the way it is. But he's not saying this is right. So let me give you some quick principles from this. Justice is not just for the rich. That's what we should take away and consider from this. Many attempt to buy justice. But in the negative assessment here, justice must not be for sale. And likewise, political and legal favors must not be for sale. So even though it's a lucrative business to sell justice, it shouldn't be for sale. And raises the question, bribery works, but is it good? We've already said no. So part of what that tells us, and as we think about bribery, is it hinders justice. It really makes... It's the opposite of justice. If I can afford to pay for the outcome I want, if I can afford to have my name scrubbed from the files, if I can afford to flee the country to some country that does not extradite, if I can afford to gain favor with these certain people so they'll leave me out of the investigation, it's contrary to justice. It's not justice at all. It is favoritism. And so we should count the real cost of bribery. We should recognize this is not a profitable system. Not at all. It's not good for society. And so we consider the societal impact of actions. And this has a broader application than just bribery. We look at how justice is administered, and we should be thinking about the societal impact of that administration of justice. So you look at our current system, and I think our system is deeply flawed. It has some huge advantages, but we have some major flaws in our current legal system. One of which I think is the unwillingness to quickly and sternly punish offenders. And so that what we have is this revolving door of crime, of criminals who are receiving fines and deferred sentences or just probation or nothing at all for their first crimes and the second crime, sometimes third crime, until they get to more serious crimes, and now they're starting maybe to be ramping up of consequences. But by that point in time, somebody has really become hardened into this life of crime because it doesn't cost them anything. And, they go to jail, they have a nice, comfortable place to sleep. They have a warm roof, a warm building. They have a roof over their head. They have meals every day, which honestly for some of them that's more than they have at home. And so there's no cost to them. What's the consequences in our society of a judicial system that works like that? And we see the consequences. What's the consequences of legalizing marijuana? What's the consequences of legalizing alcohol? Well, actually, repealing the amendment there. It was legal from the beginning, then we made it illegal. Anyway, what's the consequences to our society of these things? We think through the societal impact of our actions, both as a people and as a state, as citizens of a state, and the actions of our legislators and justices. And we should be asking these questions because we should love justice, and we should give justice to all. That really should be our desire. And there is no justification for rioting. However, if there is, and I do think there are certain groups and portions of our population that do not receive justice the same way that a larger percentage of the population receives. I think there are certain groups that are treated unjustly. And as Christians, we should desire they receive justice, proper justice. If you want to say equal justice. And I don't mean equal rights. We all have equal rights. It's already codified for us in our Constitution. But the application of those rights and the enforcement of justice in some places is not even. And we should so love justice that we want all, and we're willing to champion those who are not receiving justice. And so we must give justice to all. A couple of things very quickly. False testimony will be punished. A false witness will not go unpunished, and he who speaks lies will not escape. In this case, the false witness is very much a legal witness. The one who goes before the court and says, this is what I saw, this is what happened. And the one who lies will be punished. How one treats the lowest members of society reveals one's view of God. And this is really one of the core issues in all of this discussion of ethics, is how we treat others reveals our view of God. Proverbs 14:31 says, he who oppresses the poor reproaches his maker, but he who honors God has mercy on the needy. So our treatment of the lowest members of society reveals what we think about God. And what we think about God changes the way that we treat the others in our society, whether powerful or powerless. God will judge those who mistreat the needy. I've already said that a couple different ways. Injustice brings great suffering. Much food is in the fallow ground of the poor, and for lack of justice, there is waste. This goes back to counting the cost of societal actions. What happens when there's not justice? There is deep suffering. There is a waste of that which is good and profitable. There is a loss and a neediness. There is an increase of suffering. And then lawsuits. This is an important one. Proverbs 18:17 says, the first one to plead his cause seems right until his neighbor comes and examines him. The principle, don't believe everything your neighbors say about your neighbors. Don't believe everything you hear. Because they're going to present one side of the argument, but there's another side. At least one more. Sometimes there's 5 more. Don't believe everything that somebody says about somebody else. By the way, this applies to the news. Whether it be Fox or CNN or I don't even know the ones online now, but whatever the so-called Christian news sources online, just because they put Christian on the top of their page, don't believe everything your neighbor says about your neighbor. You have to consider, as much as possible, the whole picture. And so that if you're only hearing one voice on it, or one view on it, you don't know what you need to know to make a decision about the truthfulness of it. In many cases, we're just going to have to say, I don't know. I don't know what's true and what's not. In some cases, we need to do some investigation to find out. But don't believe everything that one person says about another, or one institution says about another, or one country says about another, or one official says about another. Don't be in a hurry to sue. Proverbs 25:8 says, do not go hastily to court. Let's just stop there. That says the whole thing, the whole point. As Christians, we are forbidden to sue other Christians. We are not forbidden to sue others. I think there may be times where it's right or necessary to file suit. We should never be in a hurry to sue. We should not be quick to say, I'm going to sue you. And then part of that is because we should prefer to resolve problems privately. He says, debate your case with your neighbor and do not disclose the secret to another. And so we're not just going to say, I want to resolve this between me and you. Let's essentially settle out of court, settle before we go to court. Part of what he also says here is settle it privately and keep it private. If you can resolve it and nobody else gets brought in, resolve it and don't bring anybody else in. Because again, we're still looking for the benefit of the other. Not myself. I'm not looking for revenge. I'm not looking to cause them harm. I'm looking for their good. This has so many ramifications on the way that we live, the way that we interact with others, the way that we view our government, our news media, our court system, the way we view businessmen, neighbors, and really just it affects every aspect of our lives. And this is, all the Proverbs are well worth studying, meditating on, and continuing to work on how to flesh out in your life. But some of these are very particularly pertinent in our lives as we think about how are we interacting with the people closest to us. Are we doing so with integrity, where we are rightly applying biblical truth, biblical wisdom to our relationship?